Welcome to the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. Hello and welcome to the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. James passionately advocates for surrogates, providing practical legal guidance to both surrogates and donors throughout their journeys. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is The Surrogate's Perspective, what you need to know about the other entities involved in your journey. James, welcome back.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, great to have you here. So can you walk us through the role of an agency regarding how a surrogate is selected and matched with the intended parents?
Yeah, so one thing for people who are just learning about the industry, we typically have what we call either agency managed matches or independent journeys. An agency is a third party that basically recruits surrogates who want to be matched with intended parents and then goes out and looks for intended parents who are needing a surrogate. And they're the matchmaker. They put them together for, certain qualities or characteristics that people are looking for, geographical areas. That's kind of what they do. The people who do independence oftentimes are either already known to each other, they've done a journey prior to this. I've seen families where sisters carry for other siblings or vice, some other kind of arrangement where they may not go through an agency because they have already matched themselves just on their own or independently, hence the independent journey. But an agency, when they look for surrogates, they have to find women who fit just kind of the normal ASRM guidelines for being a surrogate in terms of age, had a prior pregnancy before, lack of complications with the pregnancy, and kind of all the medical stuff. So a lot of times the agency will medically screen the women who are looking to be a surrogate at the outset before they even start thinking about matching them with intended parents. They also do psychological evaluations because with our surrogacy journey, we want to make sure that the woman who's going to carry the baby knows that she's going to be giving it up, or not really giving it up, giving it back to the intended parents once the baby is born, and that they're not going to have any questions or concerns about being able to do that. Once those two big things are kind of met, we have the agency going out there and looking and having intended parents who need their services to find surrogates. And they will come in and figure out, here are surrogates that meet whatever criterion or thing they're looking for, whether it's, age, whether it's where they live. Some of it can be, if they've been a proven surrogate, if they've already done it once before or not. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there. And then the agency kind of, like I said, plays matchmaker and introduces them and says, hey, what about this person? Surrogate, would you want to be a surrogate for these intended parents? And intended parent or parents, is this someone that you think would be a good surrogate for you? They do that match. And then once everybody says, yes, let's move forward, we then kind of get into the legal and the other medical, usually qualifications that come into play.
I can't imagine. It's got to be such a crazy process, meeting a potential surrogate, thinking about that and thinking about, interviewing that person, trying to figure out if they're the right ones for you. Do you think that a lot of couples think of it as is it a gut feeling? Are there specific things they typically ask? How does that process usually unfold?
Yeah. So, a lot of it will just come down to, the feel of the arrangement. Like, how do you feel talking to this person?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have a trusting relationship or not? Because one of the things with surrogacy that's important for people to remember is, once you engage the surrogate, the whole goal is to hopefully get her pregnant so she carries their baby, which the surrogate wants to do also. But once she's pregnant, you're kind of dealing with 9 months of really trusting them to take really good care of themselves. And, the most precious thing that a parent has is their child. Like, all they want is the best thing for them. And so somebody is just that gut feeling. Like, do I feel like this person, has whatever little things I might be looking for, and then has those kind of intangible qualities of, I just feel good talking to them. I feel like we have a, whether it's a personal or a spiritual or whatever kind of bond they might have, something that's more than just, oh, she seems good. Because there is a lot to that relationship that's going to build over time, and that has a significant impact potentially on, the future child or children that are born by that surrogate.
Right. Yeah. You're not sitting there going, how good are you at throwing a football or something like that? Yeah.
Which is different from like an egg donor, right? Or a sperm donor, where a lot of it is, in those instances, people are looking for, what are their vocal intonations sound like? What kind of attributes do they have? What kind of things do they like to do? What kind of academic or personal hobby interests are there? Because a lot of people are now thinking that in terms of, it's not just a pretty face or a good profile or something else that's very visual. There's a lot to the depth of a person that's kind of important for an egg donor or sperm donor. Nowadays, it's different than 20, 30 years ago. And on the surrogacy side, it's kind of like, well, I hope you can, get pregnant and carry this baby for me, but I need to get through the next, 9, 12 months or whatever, and then hopefully have my child. And so that's, some differences about what they're looking for, but that's also why, agencies tend to have, usually most of them want to have not a plethora, but a decent pool of surrogate candidates to work with, because sometimes it's just a gut feel. Like, I liked her on paper, I just didn't really feel it when we kind of had our meeting or something else. And it can also be the surrogate. The surrogate sometimes say, I'm just not sure this is the right parent or parents for me, and I'd like to be rematched. So it needs to be mutual, and they kind of hopefully share those preferences with the agency, so the agency can whittle down, the match options and hopefully arrive at a successful match.
What other entities are involved in the surrogate's journey, and how do they sort of fit in with the legal contract?
Yeah, so one of the first big ones when they get to an agency or independent is they usually have to get some type of medical clearance. That is going to involve a medical evaluation from an IVF specialist or an IVF physician or an RE, and they are the ones who are going to be doing the embryo transfers. So they are often looking at prior medical records, prior pregnancies, previous OB notes from their other pregnancies to figure out, like, do we think this person who wants to be a surrogate is going to be a good fit to actually be a surrogate. And a lot of times the IVF physicians will have very sometimes unique and kind of almost peccadillos about what they like or don't like. I've heard of some IVF physicians that are just very, very picky, and I don't know if they want to say they have super high standards, but what they're looking for to get medical clearance is often very difficult to get through. And then the other ones that kind of have like the basics, like you have to be, in certain BMI ranges, you have to have had a pregnancy and, hopefully not a complicated pregnancy when you did your own. So other things that are kind of just your universal disqualifying things that they're looking for. But so the medical side has the IVF clinic and the physician and staff. Then you also have the psychological evaluations that are going to be done by either psychologists or mental health professionals who oftentimes deal specifically with surrogacy or egg donation. And they're looking at, does this person, know what they're getting themselves into and kind of what the obligations of that are going to be. That's often all stuff you're doing before you even ever get matched. So just to get into like the next room, basically to be potentially matched, you're going to be meeting those medical providers. When we get into the journey, obviously we have the lawyers, and even though I am a lawyer, I know most people don't like talking to lawyers, but we're a necessary evil as part of this. Like we do the contracts to make sure that everybody knows what the obligations are and what we're agreeing to. So you're going to interact with the legal team usually once your match is ready, and then we kind of go through the contract and get you ready for that process. In terms of getting the match kind of codified with the contract, we also deal with medical insurance, life insurance, other things that are kind of purchased for the surrogate, an escrow account, or someone who's going to manage the funds through arrangement. So there's all these what we call non-parties to the contract that are out there that all play a role in some way. And then we have, like, during the pregnancy, we have OBs and we have delivery hospitals, or we have specialists that we go see during the journey. And again, all these people are doing amazing work, but they're not part of the contract. The contract's just between the intended parent or parents and the surrogate. So we kind of have this hope and expectation of what all these other entities might do or what we want them to do. But usually we can't guarantee they're going to do that because they're not signing the contract anyway.
We've talked in previous episodes about the way the escrow companies kind of fit into this. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using an escrow company to manage the escrow account? And how does that differ if the intended parents manage their own funds or if their attorney holds the trust account? Can you kind of speak to how that process works?
Yeah, so with almost the vast majority of arrangements, there's going to be some financial component to it. Some of them are, higher compensation packages, some are lower. We have a handful that are altruistic, which usually means like a familial arrangement or a best friends caring for someone. They don't want to be paid. They just want to not lose money by being a surrogate. So the parents will pay for limited things like, health insurance, uncovered medical costs, travel to get the surrogate to and from the clinic. And a lot of times that's where we sometimes will see parents kind of just holding their funds themselves and the surrogate either just being reimbursed or kind of having the parent pay for things directly when needed. Usually on the legal side, for us as the attorneys, that's not like our first preference. We're not big fans of that just because, and as we've mentioned before, and things are great until they're not. And even if they're good friendly relationships or family arrangements, being in business with each other has often led to strained relationships. Throw on top of that, just kind of the emotional and psychological kind of feeling of this being about the baby that somebody wants can create strains where, if the parent is managing the funds, the surrogate is kind of dependent on and beholden to the parent making the payments or providing the funds. And there's not a lot of recourse left for her other than we have a breach of contract issue or something else to go after to compel them to give them the funds. The other side of that is having a third party manage the funds. What had been most common for a long time is that one of the attorneys involved would have a trust account. They would hold the intended parents' funds, and then that attorney or their staff or their team would then pay out kind of what's needed. That was very, very common all the way through, and it's still very, very common today. There's not necessarily a whole lot wrong with that. There just can be, on the surrogate side, I think, a little bit of an apprehension about the entity that's holding all the funds is representing the other party. So there can be this feeling of like, every time I ask for something, I'm asking their lawyer for money. And usually they're going to say yes. Most of the attorneys who do this, have been doing it for a very long time, like, we're impartial about the money. But there's just this kind of psychological thing about, oh, you really completely impartial? Or what if you don't think I have a claim to that, and you're going to kind of angle it from their best perspective or interest? And so because of that,
which is logical.
Which is logical, yeah, makes complete sense. To fill that gap, you've had a lot of third-party escrows that come in who are, finance companies that have legal teams associated with them. They are being truly independent. They're not a legal representation for either the surrogate or the intended parent, but they have legal staff that can read the contract and say, yes, this is a required payment, we're going to issue it. And so they kind of become a referee between either the surrogate and the intended parents, or the attorneys for both of those parties, who are maybe have competing views about what something should be. And now we have a third party that can kind of say, well, I think it really falls on this side or that side. The agency plays a role in there too, because the agency is kind of wonderfully and awkwardly in the middle of all this. So they're trying to make the match as happy as possible. And when things are kind of sticky, they have to sometimes pick a side. But my preference is, if a third party, either trust account with an attorney's office or escrow account is holding the funds, there's at least a layer of kind of protection for the surrogate between them and the intended parent or parents. So I like that at least as a minimum. When it comes to attorney accounts versus escrow accounts, there's a variety of reasons why one makes more sense than the other. Some of it just comes down to technology. I mean, a lot of the escrow companies just have systems in place that are sometimes more advanced or more like a banking system than your attorney trust account has. But there are a lot of attorney trust accounts who are very sophisticated. They do a great job doing it. Sometimes it just will come down to like what the parent and the surrogate sort of want. One of the big driving factors is oftentimes the agency will have a preference. So the agency may say, we really like it if you use an escrow account versus an attorney trust account, or vice versa. And they kind of just put that as part of their match requirement. And then the lawyers say, okay, great. So there's options that are out there. But again, the basics of what we're doing in surrogacy arrangements is pretty obvious for most. How things are paid, when they get paid, how they get paid. What if funding is drying up? Like, what does that look like? Who fixes it? That's usually where you want as much impartiality in there as we can to protect both sides.
What are the most common challenges or issues that surrogates face during their journeys with these other kind of non-parties to the surrogacy contract?
I think one of them is that, so other than the agency, who has kind of a vested interest in making everybody happy, the other entities have their roles, but they're not really emotionally or really financially invested in like this particular match. So you will find that a surrogate and intended parents love each other. They're super excited, and they just can't get medical clearance from the IVF physician because for whatever reason, that physician just doesn't want to clear or qualify the surrogate as being the right fit for those intended parents. So there can be some heartache and some kind of just, gnashing of teeth over who stands in the way of us being able to move forward. The other ones tend to be kind of not pro forma, but they tend to be people that just are necessarily like boxes to check. Like, we want to make sure that the psychologist or the mental health professional gets a chance to usually interview both parents and surrogate. Sometimes they do joint counseling sessions, but we want everybody on the same page. That usually is well before we get into contracts and everything else. And then it's kind of a one and done thing. And it goes into the file that's been complete. The other one that comes into play are like when we do get pregnant, usually after at some point in time, typically 8 to 9 weeks, the surrogate is no longer being evaluated or monitored by the IVF clinic, and they now go to the OB, either of their choice or that's covered under their insurance, and we start doing the maternity care with that OB. And that sometimes creates headaches in terms of what the OB wants, what testing they think is relevant or important, and any disagreements that happen between a surrogate and their intended parent. We now have this like medical intermediary who's functioning there. So that sometimes is an issue we think about. And the other big one that tends to come up more often than we would like is insurance. Insurance is kind of, again, not necessarily necessary evil, but they're great. But sometimes you run into cases where a policy doesn't cover certain things or has a lien or an exclusion, and they make what we thought was a very seamless and easy journey more complicated with kind of a financial hiccup that we weren't really expecting. So those are the ones that usually come up the most often in these kind of arrangements.
How do the what you're talking about, these challenges and stuff, how are they different when a couple is using a friend or a family member versus when they're doing something through an agency or something like that? Are these challenges different?
They're different in both not a good and a bad way, but they are different because when you have an existing either friendly or familial relationship, sometimes things are easier to work through and sometimes they're harder to work through.
Right.
So, I have very rarely seen a family or friendly arrangement who is using an agency. So more often than not, those matches are dealing with everything kind of on their own. And they don't have or may choose just not to have an agency kind of manage and facilitate the process through. So every time there is a hiccup, it falls directly to the parents or to the surrogate. And that sometimes is a challenge that they just don't have, that kind of sounding board. They might come to the attorneys, not always, because that's not necessarily our job. I mean, when they do independent arrangements, we're not meant to be like agency light. We're not there to fill that role. There are a number of organizations that are coming in saying, we will basically help you manage your independent journey, which I think is great. There are a lot of times people who used to run agencies or have been surrogates on their own. And they do run an agency light. They're not there to match you, but if you find people, they're there to kind of coach you through the process. That is super helpful. The normal agency matches usually will rely on the agency staff to help kind of smooth things over when hiccups do arise. But, sometimes it would just come down to like, well, what does the contract say? Who has to do X or Y and who gets to decide whether we do that or not? And, sometimes those issues are easier to deal with when there's not like an existing personal relationship and it just becomes, what's the black letter of the contract?
It's more business.
Yeah, more of a business transaction than.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be, good from the standpoint of we feel like, oh, the surrogate will talk to me or her attorney and the parents will talk to their attorney and then the attorneys talk to each other, right? So most of the attorneys who do this have very civil and ongoing relationships. We know each other. We're trying to do the best for everybody so we can, get through some of those things. But there are some times where we just have a client either on my side or their side that's sort of, entrenched and stuck in their heels are dug in. They don't want to give it anyway. And sometimes we have to just figure out, okay, well, where is this going to fall out? And do we really want to go to like mediation or arbitration to fix this? Or can we resolve it informally? So those tend to be the kind of bigger issues that we see in an independent or a friendly journey versus maybe an agency match journey.
Yeah, I could tell. Yeah, the emotion they were talking about that gets involved when it's your friend or family member. It's less business. It's more, I don't know, it's more personal maybe.
Yeah. And if you have an agency or you have a coach, right, if you have that third party, it also kind of helps remove some of those initial emotional reactions to things.
Yeah.
Right. Because now you have someone to say, hey, does this make sense? Like, is this a reasonable request? Is this just totally out of left field?
Yeah,
and you're going to deal with someone who like sees these all the time. And they do a great job of just kind of, mellowing out the middle of where these kind of ups and downs are. And in many ways, that's great. And that's why the agencies, charge fees and they have their role and they do a great job, most of them. Just some people choose not to go that route. And they just have to realize that when they don't have that third party, it's basically them and their attorneys. And, once you kind of go to the attorneys to do everything, it starts to feel very strained. So that's one issue we see.
Definitely. I could see that. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. To connect with James, visit surrogatescorner.com. And please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review if you get a chance. James, always great to see you. Thanks so much for the insight.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.